One of the more popular in the last 100 years or so contexts that Jesus is placed in is the context of the dying and rising God archetype. That comes from what scholars call the mystery cults. In the recent history of biblical studies, in the last 100 years or so, it has been popular to look at Jesus in comparison to the mystery cults. That is, those religious groups in the Greco-Roman world that had as part of their story a dying and rising God. The question becomes, did Christianity use that template, dying and rising God, to understand who Jesus is? That's what we're going to explore. But before we do, I want to say a word about how important it is to place Christianity, this birth of Christianity, in its context of the first century Greco-Roman world. Jesus, as a Jew living in Galilee and Judea under Roman imperial rule, and then the apostles spreading this news all around the Mediterranean basin in these large Greco-Roman cities like Corinth or Ephesus and also Rome. So it is a good thing to put the first century Christians in their world. But I'm going to suggest that comparing the Jesus story and the story of the gods and goddesses of the mystery cults is not doing good history. It's not a good comparison. In fact, we can draw some really sharp and important contrasts. So first, let's talk about paganism broadly, because the mystery cults, these cults that have as part of their story a God who dies and then rises, they're all part of paganism. They fit under the umbrella of paganism. Paganism was a religious expression that included any number of gods and goddesses, and these gods and goddesses were typically capricious, sometimes distant from humans, hard to figure out. They left no written record of their words or laws. And so people who were pagans, Gentiles, they had to try and figure out, what does this God or goddess want from me? How can I get them to answer my prayer? How can I keep them at least happy so that they don't bother me? Paganism is very transactional. You honor the god, and they help you or at least leave you alone. So that's the broad setting into which we then can more narrowly focus on the mystery cults. The mystery cults are called mystery cults in part because they are mysterious to us. We really don't know that much about them. What we can say is that these groups included an initiation rite, or maybe a series of initiations that brought you into the group. It's part of paganism. So these groups, you could become a devotee of a particular goddess, let's say Isis, or a god, Mithras, but still also worship the pantheon, worship the divinized emperor and the imperial family and the imperial cult. In other words, mystery cults were not exclusive. You didn't have to give up your other religious affections just to be part of the mystery cult. We know very, very little about the initiations, but it seems as though they're often happened at night. There was some of these worship ceremonies were ecstatic. People would fall into trances or dance wildly. and then not remember in the morning what had happened. Sometimes there was a lot of noise, and it was frightening. So these are some of the hints we have of what it was like to be part of a mystery cult. Who are some of the gods? You might know some of the names. Dionysus, the god of wine, was also there was a mystery cult devoted to him. Demeter and her daughter Kore, or Persephone, is another mystery cult. In that story, Demeter, the goddess who grows grain, her daughter Kore was captured by Hades and drawn down to the underworld, and Demeter, in her sorrow, refused to have the grain grow. And so Hades had to return Persephone to her mother for at least part of the year so that the grain would grow. That's the story of this particular mystery cult. Another important one is the mystery cult of Isis. This is an Egyptian story that was very popular throughout the Roman world, the Roman imperial world. And we know a little bit more about this because of a novel that was written in the early 2nd century called The Golden Ass by the author Apuleius. Apuleius wrote a novel in which the leading figure, whose name is Lucius, becomes changed based on a magical incantation that goes wrong. He becomes a donkey. And the story, the rest of the story is Lucius's various experiences, some kind of good, some not good at all, as a donkey. And towards the end of the novel, he's in despair. As a donkey, he's at the seaside, and he's praying to the goddess Isis that he would be changed back into his human form. And the goddess emerges out of the sea and tells him that if he would just be part of the procession that's coming up that honors her in the city, and if he's just able to take a bite of some of the roses that one of the priests will be carrying, that will change him back into his human form. And it does. And Lucius becomes a devotee of Isis and stays at her temple, longing to be initiated more deeply into her cult. Eventually, he is able to do that. The delay is in part because he doesn't have the money for the celebration. That little note leads me to close by telling both the similarities, but then also, I think, the significant differences between Christianity and the mystery cults. The mystery cults charged money for initiations. Christianity, the gospel was free. It's grace to all. The mystery cults were hidden. The devotees were not to talk about their initiation. It was secret. But the gospel was given to all good news. And any who wanted to listen to any preaching or participate in any of the services were welcome. These are significant differences. And so the superficial similarities of having a meal, having certain rites that might be similar to a baptism, those kinds of things don't get to the heart of the meaning of mystery cult and Christianity. In fact, if you want to compare Christianity to anything, any religious expression in the ancient world, the best thing to do is look at Judaism. The New Testament quotes from the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures, all the time. In fact, Jesus' title, Christ, is simply the Greek way of saying Messiah, that promised Jewish leader that would lead the people of God in all righteousness. So better to look at how Christianity grew out of Judaism as Jesus fulfilled the promises that God made to his people way back at the beginning than to look at pagan superficial parallels that don't help us understand the gospel message.